They call you the Godfather of AI.
Yes, they do.
Why do they call you that?
There weren't that many people who believed that we could make neural networks work, artificial neural networks. So for a long time in AI, from the 1950s onwards, there were kind of two ideas about how to do AI. One idea was that sort of core of human intelligence was reasoning. And to do reasoning, you needed to use some form of logic. And so AI had to be based around logic. And in your head, you must have something like symbolic expressions that you manipulated with rules. And that's how intelligence worked. And things like learning or reasoning by analogy, they'd all come later once we've figured out how basic reasoning works. There was a different approach, which is to say, let's model AI on the brain, because obviously the brain makes us intelligent. So simulate a network of brain cells on a computer and try and figure out how you would learn strengths of connections between brain cells so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or recognize speech or even do reasoning. I pushed that approach for like 50 years. Because so few people believed in it, there weren't many good universities that had groups that did that. So if you did that, the best young students who believed in that came and worked with you. So I was very fortunate in getting a whole lot of really good students.
Some of which have gone on to create and play an instrumental role in creating platforms like OpenAI.
Yes, so Ilya Sutskever would be a nice example, a whole bunch of them.
Why did you believe that modeling it off the brain was a more effective approach?
It wasn't just me believed it. Early on, von Neumann believed it and Turing believed it. And if either of those had lived, I think AI would have had a very different history. But they both died young.
You think AI would have been here sooner?
I think the neural net approach would have been accepted much sooner if either of them had lived.
In this season of your life, what mission are you on?
My main mission now is to warn people how dangerous AI could be.
Did you know that when you became the godfather of AI?
No, not really. I was quite slow to understand some of the risks. Some of the risks were always very obvious, like people would use AI to make autonomous lethal weapons. That is, things that go around deciding by themselves who to kill. Other risks, like the idea that they would one day get smarter than us and maybe would become irrelevant, I was slow to recognize that. Other people recognized it 20 years ago. I only recognized it a few years ago that that was a real risk that might be coming quite soon.
How could you not have foreseen that if with everything you know here about cracking the ability for these computers to learn similar to how humans learn and just introducing any rate of improvement?
It's a very good question. How could you not have seen that? But remember, neural networks 20 or 30 years ago were very primitive in what they could do. They were nowhere near as good as humans at things like vision and language and speech recognition. The idea that you have to now worry about it getting smarter than people, that seems silly then.
When did that change?
It changed for the general population when ChatGPT came out. It changed for me when I realized that the kinds of digital intelligences we're making have something that makes them far superior to the kind of biological intelligence we have. If I want to share information with you, so I go off and I learn something, and I'd like to tell you what I learned. So I produce some sentences. This is a rather simplistic model, but roughly right. Your brain is trying to figure out, how can I change the strengths of connections between neurons so I might have put that word next? And so you'll do a lot of learning when a very surprising word comes, and not much learning when it's a very obvious word. If I say fish and chips, you don't do much learning when I say chips. But if I say fish and cucumber, you do a lot more learning. You wonder, why did I say cucumber? So that's roughly what's going on in your brain.
I'm predicting what's coming next.
That's how we think it's working. Nobody really knows for sure how the brain works. And nobody knows how it gets the information about whether you should increase the strength of a connection or decrease the strength of a connection. That's the crucial thing. But what we do know now from AI is that if you could get information about whether to increase or decrease the connection strength so as to do better at whatever tasks you're trying to do, then we could learn incredible things, because that's what we're doing now with artificial neural nets. It's just we don't know for real brains how they get that signal about whether to increase or decrease.
As we sit here today, what are the big concerns you have around safety of AI? If we were to list the the top couple that are really front of mind and that we should be thinking about.
Can I have more than a couple?
Go ahead. I'll write them all down and we'll go through them.
Okay, first of all, I want to make a distinction between two completely different kinds of risk. There's risks that come from people misusing AI,
Yeah.
and that's most of the risks and all of the short-term risks. And then there's risks that come from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
And I talk mainly about that second risk because lots of people say, is that a real risk? And yes, it is. Now, we don't know how much of a risk it is. We've never been in that situation before. We've never had to deal with things smarter than us. So really the thing about that existential threat is that we have no idea how to deal with it. We have no idea what it's going to look like. And anybody who tells you they know just what's going to happen and how to deal with it, they're talking nonsense. So we don't know how to estimate the probabilities it'll replace us. Some people say it's like less than 1%. My friend Yann Lecan, who was a postdoc with me, thinks, no. We're always going to be, we build these things, we're always going to be in control. We'll build them to be obedient. And other people, like Yudkowsky, say, no, these things are going to wipe us out for sure. If anybody builds it, it's going to wipe us all out. And he's confident of that. I think both of those positions are extreme. It's very hard to estimate the probabilities in between.
If you had to bet on who was right out of your two friends?
I simply don't know. So if I had to bet, I'd say the probabilities in between, and I don't know where to estimate it in between. I often say 10 to 20% chance they'll wipe us out. But that's just gut, based on the idea that we're still making them, and we're pretty ingenious. And the hope is that if enough smart people do enough research with enough resources, we'll figure out a way to build them so they'll never want to harm us.
Sometimes I think if we talk about that second path, sometimes I think about nuclear bombs and the invention of the atomic bomb and how it compares. Like, how is this different? Because the atomic bomb came along and I imagine a lot of people at that time thought our days are numbered.
Yes, I was there. We did.
Yeah. But we're still here.
We're still here, yes. So the atomic bomb was really only good for one thing. And it was very obvious how it worked. Even if you hadn't had the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was obvious that it was a very big bomb that was very dangerous. With AI, it's good for many, many things. It's going to be magnificent in healthcare and education and more or less any industry that needs to use its data. It's going to be able to use it better with AI. So we're not going to stop the development. You know, people say, well, why don't we just stop it now? We're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things. Also, we're not going to stop it because it's good for battle robots, and none of the countries that sell weapons are going to want to stop it. Like the European regulations, they have some regulations about AI, and it's good they have some regulations, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. And in particular, the European regulations have a clause in them that say none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So governments are willing to regulate companies and people, but they're not willing to regulate themselves.
It seems pretty crazy to me that I go back and forward, but if Europe has a regulation, but the rest of the world doesn't, aren't we
Yeah,
just
it puts
putting
them at a
ourselves
competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
So
And we're seeing this already. I don't think people realize that when OpenAI release a new model or a new piece of software in America, they can't release it to Europe yet because of regulations here. So Sam Altman tweeted saying, our new AI agent thing is available to everybody, but it can't come to Europe yet because there's regulations.
yes,
What does that gives us a productivity disadvantage?
Yes.
Right.
What we need is, I mean, at this point in history, when we're about to produce things more intelligent than ourselves, what we really need is a kind of world government that works, run by intelligent, thoughtful people. And that's not what we got.
So free for all.
Well, what we've got is sort of, we've got capitalism, which is done very nicely by us. It's produced lots of goods and services for us. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. And that's not what you want from the people developing this stuff.
So let's do the risks then. You talked about there's human risks and then there's
So I've distinguished these two kinds of risk.
Yeah.
Let's talk about all the risks from bad human actors using AI. There's cyber attacks. So between 2023 and 2024, they increased by about a factor of 1,200%. And that's probably because these large language models make it much easier to do phishing attacks.
And a phishing attack, for anyone that doesn't know, is...
They send you something saying, hi, I'm your friend John, and I'm stuck in El Salvador. Could you just wire this money? That's one kind of attack.
Yeah.
But the phishing attacks are really trying to get your logon credentials.
And now with AI, they can clone my voice, my image.
They can do all that.
I'm struggling at the moment because there's a bunch of AI scams on X and also Meta. And there's one in particular on Meta, so Instagram, Facebook at the moment, which is a paid advert where they've taken my voice from the podcast. They've taken my mannerisms and they've made a new video of me encouraging people to go and take part in this crypto Ponzi scam or whatever. And we've been, we spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end emailing Meta, telling, please take this down. They take it down, another one pops up. They take that one down, another one pops up. So it's like whack-a-mole.
Yes,
and then
very annoying.
The heartbreaking part is you get the messages from people that have fallen for the scam and they've lost £500 or $500.
And they're crossed with you because you recommended it.
And I'm sad for them.
It's very annoying.
Yeah.
I have a smaller version of that, which is some people now publish papers with me as one of the authors. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it's in order that they can get lots of citations to themselves.
So cyber attacks, a very real threat. There's been an explosion of those.
And these already, obviously AI is very patient. So they can go through 100 million lines of code looking for known ways of attacking them. That's easy to do. But they're going to get more creative. And some people believe, some people who know a lot believe that maybe by 2030, they'll be creating new kinds of cyber attacks, which no person ever thought of.
So it will essentially know everything that humans know, but more, because it will learn new things.
It will learn new things. It will also see all sorts of analogies that people probably never saw. So, for example, at the point when GPT-4 couldn't look on the web, I asked it, why is a compost heap like an atom bomb? Off you go.
I have no idea.
Exactly. Excellent. That's exactly what most people would say. It said, well, the time scales are very different and the energy scales are very different. But then it went on to talk about how a compost heap, as it gets hotter, generates heat faster. And an atom bomb, as it produces more neutrons, generates neutrons faster. And so they're both chain reactions, but at very different time and energy scales. And I believe GPT-4 had seen that during its training. It had understood the analogy between a compost heap and an atom bomb. And the reason I believe that is, if you've only got 1 trillion connections, remember you have 100 trillion, and you need to have thousands of times more knowledge than a person, you need to compress information into those connections. And to compress information, you need to see analogies between different things. In other words, it needs to see all the things that are chain reactions and understand the basic idea of a chain reaction and code that, and then code the ways in which they're different. And that's just a more efficient way of coding things than coding each of them separately. So it's seen many, many analogies, probably many analogies that people have never seen. That's why I also think that people who say these things will never be creative, they're going to be much more creative than us because they're going to see all sorts of analogies we never saw. And a lot of creativity is about seeing strange analogies.
People are somewhat romantic about the specialness of what it is to be human. And you hear lots of people saying, it's very, very different. It's a computer. We are, we're conscious. We are creatives. We have these sort of innate, unique abilities that the computers will never have. What do you say to those people?
I'd argue a bit with the innate. So the first thing I say is we have a long history of believing people were special. And we should have learned by now. We thought we were at the center of the universe. We thought we were made in the image of God. White people thought they were very special. We just tend to want to think we're special. My belief is that more or less everyone has a completely wrong model of what the mind is. Let's suppose I drink a lot or I drop some acid, and not recommended. And I say to you, I have the subjective experience of little pink elephants floating in front of me. Most people interpret that as there's some kind of inner theater called the mind, and only I can see what's in my mind. And in this inner theatre, there's little pink elephants floating around. So in other words, what's happened is my perceptual system's gone wrong, and I'm trying to indicate to you how it's gone wrong and what it's trying to tell me. And the way I do that is by telling you what would have to be out there in the real world for it to be telling the truth. And so these little pink elephants, they're not in some inner theatre. These little pink elephants are hypothetical things in the real world. And that's my way of telling you how my perceptual system's telling me fibs. So now let's do that with a chatbot.
Yeah.
Because I believe that current multimodal chatbots have subjective experiences. And very few people believe that, but I'll try and make you believe it. So suppose I have a multimodal chatbot. It's got a robot arm so it can point, and it's got a camera so it can see things. And I put an object in front of it, and I say, point at the object. It goes like this, no problem. Then I put a prism in front of its lens. And so then I put an object in front of it, and I say, point at the object, and it goes there. Good. And I say, no, that's not where the object is. The object's actually straight in front of you, but I put a prism in front of your lens. And the chatbot says, oh, I see, the prism bent the light rays, so the object's actually there, but I had the subjective experience that it was there. Now, if the chatbot says that, it's using the word subjective experience exactly the way people use them. It's an alternative view of what's going on. They're hypothetical states of the world, which, if they were true, would mean my perceptual system wasn't lying. And that's the best way I can tell you what my perceptual system's doing when it's lying to me. Now, we need to go further to deal with sentience and consciousness and feelings and emotions. But I think in the end, they're all going to be dealt with in a similar way. There's no reason machines can't have them all. But people say machines can't have feelings. And people are curiously confident about that. I have no idea why. Suppose I make a battle robot, and it's a little battle robot, and it sees a big battle robot that's much more powerful than it. It would be really useful if it got scared. Now, when I get scared, various physiological things happen that we don't need to go into, and those won't happen with the robot. But all the cognitive things, like I better get the hell out of here, and I better sort of change my way of thinking so I focus and focus and focus and don't get distracted, all of that will happen with robots too. People will build in things so that they, when the circumstances are such they should get the hell out of there, they get scared and run away. They'll have emotions then. They won't have the physiological aspects, but they will have all the cognitive aspects. And I think it would be odd to say they're just simulating emotions. No, they're really having those emotions. The little robot got scared and ran away.
It's not running away because of adrenaline. It's running away because of a sequence of sort of neurological, in its neural net, processes happened,
which have the equivalent effect to adrenaline.
So do you
and
think...
it's not just adrenaline, right? There's a lot of cognitive stuff goes on when you get scared.
Yeah. So do you think that there is conscious AI? And when I say conscious, I mean that represents the same properties of consciousness that a human has.
There's two issues here. There's a sort of empirical one and a philosophical one. I don't think there's anything in principle that stops machines from being conscious. I'll give you a little demonstration of that before we carry on. Suppose I take your brain, and I take one brain cell in your brain, and I replace it by, this is a bit Black Mirror-like, I replace it by a little piece of nanotechnology that's just the same size, that behaves in exactly the same way when it gets pings from other neurons. It sends out pings just as the brain cell would have. So the other neurons don't know anything's changed. Okay, I've just replaced one of your brain cells with this little piece of nanotechnology. Would you still be conscious?
Yeah.
Now you can see where this argument's going.
Yeah. So if you replaced all of them.
As I replace them all, at what point do you stop being conscious?
Well, people think of consciousness as this like ethereal thing that exists maybe beyond the brain cells.
Yeah, well, people have a lot of crazy ideas. People don't know what consciousness is, and they often don't know what they mean by it. And then they fall back on saying, well, I know it because I've got it, and I can see that I've got it. And they fall back on this theatre model of the mind, which I think is nonsense.
What do you think of consciousness as, if you had to try and define it? Is it, because I think of it as just like the awareness of myself. I don't know.
I think it's a term we'll stop using. Suppose you want to understand how a car works. Well, you know, some cars have a lot of oomph, and other cars have a lot less oomph. Like an Aston Martin's got lots of oomph, and a little Toyota Corolla doesn't have much oomph. But oomph isn't a very good concept for understanding cars. If you want to understand cars, you need to understand about electric engines or petrol engines and how they work. And it gives rise to oomph, but oomph isn't a very useful explanatory concept. It's the kind of essence of a car. It's the essence of an Aston Martin, but it doesn't explain much. I think consciousness is like that. And I think we'll stop using that term. But I don't think there's any reason why a machine shouldn't have it. If your view of consciousness is that it intrinsically involves self-awareness, then the machine's got to have self-awareness. It's got to have cognition about its own cognition and stuff. But I'm a materialist through and through, and I don't think there's any reason why a machine shouldn't have consciousness.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.